This is going to be, it's a little awkward when you want to disagree with someone on your side of the aisle, but I have to dramatically disagree with my colleague, Ms. Crockett, who used data and statistics and facts to claim that this is the least productive Congress in modern history. First of all, this Congress removed the Speaker, okay, which has never happened in the history of the Republic. That's clearly that's a big accomplishment in the 118th. This Congress took 15 rounds to even elect that Speaker that they then removed, right, which was historic in its own right. And then they removed a member of their own party. That hadn't happened in 20 years, so kudos to them. They've had a failed impeachment of a president. I don't think we've seen that happen in a really long time. This Congress did impeach a cabinet secretary, though, without meeting any constitutional threshold. We haven't seen that happen in 150 years. This Congress wants to hold Merrick Garland in contempt and then possibly arrest him. I don't think we've ever seen that in the history of the Republic. We've seen a failed motion to vacate to remove a second Speaker. Again, history in the 118th. And who could forget that this Congress, on behalf of the American people, saved gas stoves and ovens and toasters and blenders and dishwashers from the communist grip of energy standards. So I think Ms. Crockett was pointing out that this is least productive. These seem to be accomplishments on behalf of the American people that are clearly historic and may never be repeated in another Congress. With that, there was a lot of discussion about the CBO report. Who is the CBO, Mr. Shriver?
The Congressional Budget Office.
Okay, so those are our folks.
Correct, Congressman.
Okay, and it's nonpartisan.
Correct.
Okay, and you mentioned a report that they issued, right? That report, which I have here, came out in April of 2024.
Yes, Congressman.
Okay.
That's the report I was referring to.
And even though it's nonpartisan, who controls the House in 2024?
I believe the Republican Party.
Okay, I believe you're correct. So on page 21 of that report, which is the congressional report from the CBO, it specifically shows the difference between the private sector and the federal government when it comes to teleworking. There's a chart which I have behind me, and I'm not going to do what Trump did and just circle Alabama, but I am going to circle that area right there, right? So we always constantly hear that we should run government like a business. This seems to show, according to the congressional report, our report from April, just a month ago, that the private sector is teleworking more than federal employees. Is that what this chart shows?
Congressman, that's how I read that chart, yes.
Oh my God. So the federal government is actually outpacing the private sector. I'm sorry, the private sector is actually outpacing us in teleworking. I mean, you think, like, my colleagues should file, like, a resolution of disapproval of the private sector because of all of this teleworking that the private sector is doing?
Well, Congressman, I always think that the work arrangements should be aligned to what best advances the mission of the agency, and this is the data I was referring to that shows that federal workers are spending more time in the office than private sector right now.
Okay, so that attack about all this teleworking that federal employees, right, is really misinformation, because we're below the private sector, we're really keeping pace, right? Would that be fair?
I think we're keeping I think we're keeping pace, and I think consistent with what I've been testifying to today, we have to keep evaluating it, right? Like, our North Star is providing the best service to the American people, and we need to make sure that work arrangements like telework are advancing that, and I think that they are.
Thank you. I yield the balance of my time. Thank you.
I'll now recognize myself for questions, and I know this question's been asked, but I want to ask it again for the record. How many federal employees are currently teleworking?
So, Congressman, we have 46% under OPM's most recent telework data.
46% of the federal workforce. What was that number before COVID?
So the number before, I'd have to go back and look at the specific reports, Congressman. I think the thing that changed is that a higher percentage of the people who are eligible to telework are now teleworking than were before COVID.
Would it be somewhere around 17% before COVID or 20% before COVID, roughly, ballpark?
Congressman, I'd have to go back, but Mr. Chairman, for sure, the telework participation is at a higher level now than it was prior to the pandemic.
How current is that data where you say 46%?
So that data is based on the OPM telework report, annual telework report that we produced in December of 23, which is based on 2022 data.
Okay. So more than double, maybe well more than double of the number of federal employees are teleworking since COVID currently. How many days a week are federal employees teleworking?
It's a range, Congressman. It can go anywhere from occasionally and situationally, where you don't have any specific scheduled telework day, to sometimes people have a certain number of telework days. The maximum would be 4 a week.
What specific benefits has OPM observed related to increased union membership in federal agencies?
So my understanding is that the union members, the membership of federal unions has gone up over the last several years.
Since COVID.
The union membership has gone up since COVID. I haven't drawn that causal connection, but I think probably given where the data has been, that it has increased.
So I'd like to read a quote to you. Quote, complex rules and procedures have undermined confidence in the merit system. Many managers and personnel officers complain that the existing procedures intended to ensure merit and protect against arbitrary actions have too often become the refuge of the incompetent employee. It is the dedicated and competent employee who must increase his workload. The morale of even the best motivated employee is bound to suffer under such a system, end quote. That is from the Senate report to the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. That's 6 years after I was born. I'm 51 now. So, but that could easily have been written in the present day. In the 2023 Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, 41% of respondents said poor performers remained in the work unit and continued to underperform. In previous years, as few as 28% of respondents said that steps were taken to deal with the poor performer who cannot or will not improve. A GAO recommendation from 2018 saying OPM needed to ensure agencies have tools to effectively address misconduct remains open. So what is OPM doing to know exactly how well the system is or is not working, and what is it doing to ensure that the civil service is working diligently and impartially regardless of who is in the Oval Office?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And every civil servant has an obligation to put the mission first and work on behalf of
what specifically are you doing?
So these are the things that we've done. Number one, we issue guidance to agencies to remind them about how they can make effective use of probationary periods. That's the period at the beginning of a person's career.
And what's the length of that probation?
It can be 1 year, it can be 2 years. It kind of depends on different jobs. That's why we offered free.
And you know, with a teacher, it's 5 years. But with a federal employee, it's as little as 1 year, maybe even 6 months, perhaps. But I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not, my parents are both school teachers, but
My
I'm not
mom
aware
was a
what
school teacher.
Yeah. Other things that we've done is provided free training to managers and supervisors across government on thriving in a hybrid work environment. This focused on, included a focus on performance management for teleworkers. We offer robust training to our executives and supervisors through our Federal Executive Institute training program.
So here's a frustration from our side of the aisle. We don't think you know an exact number of people who are teleworking. Now, you say it's 46%, but you knew that was going to be a major topic of this committee hearing. And we get complaints from federal employees. We communicate with federal employees. We represent federal employees. And the federal employees who have to go to work every day and do the work have this sneaky suspicion that a lot of these teleworkers aren't working as hard as they are. So the morale in the federal workforce among the hardworking employees who are going to work every day is pretty high. And, you know, we have the legislation in this committee that I sponsored, that I'm believe the Mayor Bowser has even publicly supported, called the Show Up Act, to try to get the teleworking numbers back to pre-pandemic levels. Now, if you can provide some data that will prove that this is more efficient, like my friends on the other side of the aisle keep claiming, then we would support that. If you can prove to us it's more efficient. But the problem is we all have caseworkers, and our caseworkers say it's gotten significantly harder to get people on the phone at every government agency since COVID, and we believe one of the reasons is because of excessive telework. If telework can save the taxpayers money, and if teleworkers are as efficient as people who have to go to work every day and work hard in the office every day, then I would support that. And I think most of my colleagues would support that. We would start liquidating some office buildings in Washington, D.C., where you could maybe have affordable housing or private development or things like that. But you don't have the data. And we've been begging for data. How many employees are teleworking? And is this a better deal for the taxpayers? Not is it a better deal for the teleworkers. We know the answer to that. It's a lot better deal for the teleworkers. We want to know about the taxpayers. That's who we're concerned about on this side of the aisle. So we will keep hounding you until we get that answer. Chair now recognizes Mr. Garcia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have to, respectfully disagree with some of our chairman's comments. I think that if we don't like the data, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist or it's not being collected. There is data both presented by yourself and the agency, but also by the CBO and the Congressional Budget Office. The data is pretty clear. So I just want to repeat what's been said earlier today, and that is that right now our federal workforce is teleworking less than their private counterparts in the private sector. And so I think it's really important to note that the attacks that often happen to our federal workforce, I think, are unmerited. And we should be proud that union membership is up in our federal workforce. And perhaps if we can continue to providing those same opportunities to our private sector employees, we would have this level of results. And so I appreciate our federal workforce is actually going to work into the office at a higher rate than the private sector. We know what's happening in cities across America, which is we're seeing downtowns suffering, towns having a hard time, small businesses having a hard time surviving, because of course we know that so much of the workforce has shifted to working from home. And in some cases, we have to recognize that that has been a positive development. We're never going to go back to pre-pandemic numbers. That is not going to happen. The nature of work has changed. Technology, like Zoom, like the different technology that connects people, has changed. And so those numbers have shifted permanently. But I want to thank you and our federal workforce for actually outpacing what the private sector has done. I think that's important to recognize and to look at the facts. I also just want to note that I'm very concerned I served as mayor of Long Beach 2 years ago before I got to Congress. We had 6,000 employees that I was proud to help lead, most of them civil servants doing hard work, firefighters, public works officers, folks that are filling out potholes in our health department. My concern is with this constant attack on federal workers and the civil servants. Where are the hearings on the private sector? Where are the hearings on these massive, large corporations that are not providing protections for workers? And I'm especially concerned with my colleagues and their mentions earlier of what Donald Trump's plans are for the civil service, for his plans, and essentially creating a mini army within the federal bureaucracy to lay out what he wants to see and his view of the government. We already know that he said he wants to be a dictator on day one. We know he wants to wipe out civil servants' legal protections. He talks about draining the swamp, yet he is the swamp. He wants to create this entirely different version of the federal workforce, which we strongly oppose. And this is the same person who we all know has stolen, in our opinion, millions of dollars from foreign governments, is trading favors to big oil for what he's going to do when he's back in the White House. So he has no interest in the law in the Constitution, and importantly, in protecting the civil servants that make our government work every single day. I also want to note that Schedule F, which has been brought up by many of our colleagues, is very concerning. This idea that somehow firing 50,000 civil servants and replacing them with his own little army of extreme conservatives who essentially damage the federal bureaucracy should be something that concerns all of us. And whether it's issues around Homeland Security, whether it's issues around immigration, the ability to put in appointees to stop giving out visas, to enacting damage on folks like our Dreamers and DACA recipients is very concerning to us and those of us on this side of the aisle. So we're going to continue to stand up for our federal employees. And lastly, I just wanted to ask, I think the Biden administration has actually strengthened the Civil Service Department, has actually tried to isolate interference with civil servants. And can you briefly mention, in my time that's remaining, a few of the steps the Biden administration has taken to strengthen the federal workforce?
Thank you, Congressman. In our regulation on strengthening the civil service, we focused on 3 areas. First, we made it clear that federal employees who obtain due process protections don't lose them through a technical HR process like Schedule F. Second, we made clear that the exception in the law that has existed going back to 1978 and earlier for confidential policymaking, policy advocating positions applies to political appointees, the 4,000 or so political appointees that we've talked about before. And third, we put forth transparent processes for agencies who are attempting to move employees from one status to another and allow them to file an appeal if their rights are taken away.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes our questions. So in closing, I want to thank you, Mr. Shriver, for testifying today. We look forward to continued communication, continued working relationship. And with that, without objection, all members will have 5. Is that okay? Yeah. With that, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. If there's no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.